Good morning, everybody. This morning I'm talking to Vincent Leonard from Sales Process Advisors. Vincent, I have a couple of questions I want to ask you, but before I get into those questions, would you just tell us a little bit about you and the business so we know where you're coming from?
Yeah, yeah, I will, of course. Yeah, Vincent Leonard, as you said, I'm founder of Sales Process Advisors. I'm a married man with four adult children, and I'm a fairly sports enthusiast. All things Munster, Limerick hurling, Shannon Rugby Club, etc., etc. So I have a busy time of weekends catching up with all my sport. But I essentially spend a lot of time in sales in financial services companies, stockbroking, investment banking, retail banking. And I spent the last 12 years as a sales and marketing director with a lean consultancy. And one of the things that I noticed when I was talking to clients and trying to arrange opportunities for the company I was working with, was that companies spent an awful lot of time focusing on and spending on improving their operations, their quality controls, their supply chain in terms of the process. Whereas I very seldom came across companies that were looking to spend money on improving their sales management and the processes around sales. They certainly spent money on entertainment, and they spent money on hiring big salespeople and all big names and all that sort of stuff, but not an awful lot around the management. And I just started to wonder what the actual processes were like in companies that would have had sales reps on the road, or that would have had a strong focus on sales. So I set up Sales Process Advisors for that purpose, to see, can I help companies improve and focus on their sales management. And so far so good. It's There's definitely an interest out there.
Good, great, brilliant to hear that. I think we can all always get better at sales, Vincent. So, in your experience, what's the stumbling block you see? What's that big stumbling block that companies have when they come to growing sales?
Okay, a number of things that to make sales as good as they should be, right? And sometimes that will mean growing their sales, and sometimes that will mean getting growth into their sales. But that the way the company is set up, normally sales are a little bit aloof or a little bit away from a lot of the other areas of business within the company, and the sales are sometimes a little fiefdom onto themselves. And I think this can give a little bit of exclusivity of a feeling to the salespeople and the stakeholders in sales. But mainly, I find that sales tends not to be very well aligned within a company. So what I mean by that is that you have to if you have a marketing department, your marketing department needs to have a reason, and needs to have an output, and its output should be delivering in leads into the sales department. And the sales department then is responsible for managing those leads and turning them into sales opportunities, and manage them through a sales funnel. And in a sales funnel, you will have different gates that each opportunity should cross to move to the next stage. But in a lot of companies, that isn't really well policed or well known, and there isn't a great discipline around it. Sometimes the salespeople themselves are moving the opportunities, and sometimes it's done after some sort of a sales meeting. But in a lot of cases, if you ask people what are the rules and regulations around moving opportunities, they'll say very little, or there's none at all, right? It's just done at a meeting. And the problem with that is that no one really knows how strong and how accurate that sales funnel is until the very end, when business becomes turns into actual euros. And that can be very, very dangerous for a company that needs to plan its operations and plan its business, and is looking at, the health of the business looking forward. If the pipeline isn't accurate, and isn't a fair reflection of the reality, that can have serious consequences for a company. And I think that's where I see some of the issues breaking down in sales departments, mainly that I've come across.
It's the salesman who loves to tell his sales manager that he has great leads.
Yeah, and I understand that, because I was there. So nobody wants to annoy, or be given bad news to your sales manager. The sales manager doesn't want to be given bad news to the managing director or the CEO. So there's a little bit of a game played, but that's all fine. But what's happening is that you now have a pipeline that is not reflective of the actual underlying business. So as a CEO or a managing director, that is not a good place you want to be. And you might know this is happening without actually going a little bit deeper under your sales management.
And Vincent, when you go into a company, who's that person you focus on? Who's the key change maker that you want to talk to?
In a lot of cases, and I found this with Lean, Peter, it's really the head man, the CEO, right, or the managing director. Is they are the person that sets the culture. They are the person that calls the shots. They are the person that decides how people react and how people behave. And I would really have to say that it would be the CEO I'd be looking to encourage to be a bit more curious about their sales operation and their sales management. But in medium sized companies, it might be a sales director where there's somebody who is responsible for sales but not actually doing the sales. That a sales director would be, I suppose, very interested in terms of the work that I do, because what it's going to do is going to light up right across the board everything that's happening with sales and all the different KPIs and all the different measurements and all the different activity. For example, if somebody, if their sales been lost at a certain part of the funnel, you need to go in and find out what actually is happening, right? Is it that the capability of our salespeople isn't good? How are they handling themselves? All that sort of stuff, right? How do they dress? How do they behave? How do they deal with pushback from clients during the sales process? They're all little factors that can make or break a sale. But as a sales manager or an MD, you really need to know what actually is happening, right? Because it's all about getting the conversion rates up. And the only way you can do that is finding out what's not working and make it better.
And it's really important to talk to that person right at the top, that chief executive. They're the person that
Absolutely.
really, they're the person that just initiate change.
Yeah, they tend to, once I talk to them and explain what I do, there's a sort of a light bulb moment that they sort of start to say, ooh, okay, that could be us, right? And that's where we get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you get a yes, Vincent, if you get a yes from that company, if you get a yes from that key decision maker, what are the first things you look at doing in that company? Where do you want to start?
The first thing that I do once a managing director has said, yeah, I think we'll go with this makes sense to me, we do have an issue, I immediately set up calls with in person or on virtual with the stakeholders in the sales management. That is the sales team, that is the sales manager or the sales director, that is the managing director, and that is other people related to the sales function and maybe the marketing people as well. Why do we do this? Because the managers and the managing director are just telling me what they see, but what they see isn't always what actually is happening. And what I try to understand is, how do these people feel about the sales process and how do they feel about sales in general? And how do they see things that can be improved? And you get an awful lot of information from those meetings that gives you a really good direction as to where you need to take the project. And the next thing I do is on top of that is I use that information to try and plot out a process map for the sales function. So how it actually works as it is now. And that gives me then the blueprint to work as to how it should be. But you have to map out the as is situation first and then look at where you want to take it and where it should be.
And I think you're saying as well, Vincent, the people at the top, that person at the top, doesn't always have the right perspective to see what changes need to be made.
I would say very, very likely they don't, because they have so much going on and they're responsible for so much. Where the danger comes is where the sales manager or the salespeople, they have their quite rightly view of the way things are to run. And it will run that way until somebody intervenes and changes it. But generally speaking, people will run it the way it suits them to run it and the way they want to run it until somebody really instills the disciplines that I spoke about, where it's very visible. People are being challenged, but in a very in a friendly manner about their sales opportunities, because the company needs to know how likely it is that these sales opportunities will turn into real business, and if they don't, should they be moved out of the funnel and parked for a period of time, or moved out altogether and not just taking up space.
Little bit of honesty in sales, being direct, being
A
honest.
little bit of honesty, and it's not calling out dishonesty, but a little more honesty and a little more understanding what we're actually all trying to do here.
Yeah, yeah. So, Vincent, you and I both know that it takes a bit of time for those changes to take effect. How do you show to that management team, to the boss, that something is happening, something is changing? Do you have measurements you can put in place?
One of the key measurements we look at is the conversion rates of opportunities into actual business. And that's showing how successful the sales operation is within the company. And so if you are piling in a lot of opportunities and a lot of leads into a sales funnel, but most of them are ending out or just not getting through, and you end up with a low conversion rate, it's the low conversion rate is the real example of where you got a problem. Is that you're putting in the wrong leads, you're wasting time on leads that shouldn't be in there, or there's a lot of talk about some of the leads that are in the funnel that aren't going to happen, but people are of the view that they will happen when it's quite obvious that they won't. And conversion rate would be quite high. Also, you'd be looking at how long do opportunities stay within a funnel, right? Because that's where you get the game playing, where people are looking to hold on to opportunities in a sales funnel, where it's very obvious that they shouldn't be there. So you'd be looking at trying to measure that and looking to get that down. So you'd be trying to get your conversion rate up, your velocity rate, I suppose, the speed of movement through the funnel up, and you want to get, I suppose, you're measuring the absolute that comes out of it. So once you instill that discipline, you've got to then look at, well, what's coming out of the sales funnel and how does that match our targets, right? But the immediate would be to see more leads coming through and more leads being converted into sales opportunities. That's the fastest way you can improve the top. And the next, I suppose, fastest way would be to just look at the stage gates and be more quizzical about what actually is moving and what isn't moving. And every opportunity should have a task after every sales meeting. If it's weekly, after every weekly sales meeting, every opportunity should have a task to move it to the next level, or are really grilled as to, well, what's the story with it? Why is it here? What do we need to do to move it? And those tasks then, in any CRM system, will do that for you. Those tasks then are handed out to the salespeople and they've got to do it. And they're accountable for that at the next meeting.
Getting to know is very important, and knowing what the next action is also important.
Absolutely. Yeah. They won't move on their own. So somebody has to move them, right? And the only person that can really move it is the salesman or the sales manager getting the salesman or salesperson to do it.
Vincent, what you've said is relevant to every one of us in business. And I think we all need to take into account, listen to what you've said, and think about it, and think about how it applies to ourselves and to our businesses. Vincent, thanks. Great
Yeah, I
talking
think
to
so.
you.